welcome you all, first of all, to the latest webinar in our Enginerica Education Keynote Series. So we are very pleased to be bringing you this complimentary presentation. We're very happy to see you all here today. So for those of you who are new to us, Enginerica specializes in academic center management systems for higher education. So you might be familiar with our software applications, including AccuTrack, Academia, and AccuCampus. So we started this keynote series for our clients and contacts who want to learn more about the best practices and trends in higher education. So each month we feature a distinguished speaker to talk about hot topics in the academic support field. Next month, our speaker will be Dr. Sandra McGuire of Louisiana State University, and she's going to speak on how to use metacognition to dismantle systemic racism in the Learning Center community. So be on the lookout for further information about that in your email, and of course on our website and social media. We'll make an announcement when we're ready to start getting registrations for that. So a quick introduction to myself. I'm Rachel Cook. I'm a client success manager with Enginerica. I was previously a learning center manager for 6 years. So like you all, I am very passionate about higher education and student success. I also have with me Nick Armstrong, one of our technical support specialists, and he's here as my backup and also to help with any technical issues that come up on our end, our speaker's end, or of course yours. Say hi, Nick.
Hello, how are you?
Thank you, Nick. Or well. I want to quickly draw your attention to that Q&A button. Again, we were hoping the chat would be working. It was working when we tested it out, but seems like it's being a little finicky today. So that's okay. We'll just use the Q&A or the questions button. So throughout the presentation, if you do have any questions, please enter them there. If there are any technical questions, myself or Nick will answer them. If the question is for Dr. Nilsson, we will answer them throughout the presentation at some designated times. So don't worry, we will get to those questions. So Dr. Nilsson will also ask you to use that question button to answer some questions at various points throughout the session. I would also like to mention that we sent an email yesterday, and for those of you who registered today, we sent it today with a handout for today's session. And I will be sending out the webinar slides shortly after today's presentation as well, so please be on the lookout for that. And now, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce you to this month's speaker. Dr. Linda V. Nilsson is the founding director emerita of the Office of Teaching Effectiveness and Innovation at Clemson University and the author of Teaching at Its Best, a research-based resource for college instructors, which is now in its 4th edition. She also wrote the graphic syllabus and the outcomes map, Communicating Your Course, Creating Self-Regulated Learners, Strategies to Strengthen Students' Self-Awareness and Learning Skills, and Specifications, Grading, Restoring Rigor, Motivating Students, and Saving Faculty time. Before coming to Clemson University, she directed teaching centers at Vanderbilt University and the University of California, Riverside. So today, Dr. Nilsson is going to speak on transforming students into self-regulated learners, which is something I think many of us would love to see in students. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Nilsson and have her start her presentation. So Nick, if you could hand the screen control over to her, we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Okay. Good afternoon. I assume you're all in a place where it's the afternoon, and if I am wrong, I apologize. Good morning, good evening, wherever you might be. It's a real pleasure to be here talking about self-regulated learning. It really is a way for students to support themselves, but you're in a position to teach students to support themselves. Just a few words about what self-regulated learning is, but in a very informal sense. We'll get to the formal definition in a bit. What it is, it's learning how to learn, because real learning takes place on the inside, right? It's active learning on the inside. And we normally will think of active learning as something students are doing, you know, outside of themselves, but that's not really the way learning operates at all. Students can be, you know, they can be in a science lab and they can not be thinking about it, not be processing about it, not be thinking about what they are learning. And you know what? they won't learn anything. Same thing with a simulation or a role play. If you're not processing what you're learning from it, you're not learning from it. You're just like playing a game, but not really making it a learning experience at all. And the thing is that students need to learn on their own. They need to, because they're going to get out of college. They're going to take on an occupation that will probably require them to keep up with their field, to keep reading, to keep learning. And if they don't know how to learn on their own without somebody holding their hand, they are not going to be able to be good at their occupation. And these days they say that, today's students might have several careers in their lives. So they really have to know how to learn on their own. And believe me, online learning, it involves a lot of learning on your own and being self-motivated. That doesn't seem to be what's out there. And I'll just tell you about one study that was done very recently on some professional students, pharmacy students. So these are supposedly fairly mature students. They were asked, what are the most important factors in helping them learn? And almost all of them said, well, the quality of the teaching and the quality of the curriculum, which is all fine and good. What isn't so fine and good is that very, very few of them said anything having to do with themselves, with their own learning habits and learning skills. And that's sad because, again, learning is an inside job. You can have, it's wonderful to have great teaching, it's wonderful to have a great curriculum, but without internal thinking, without internal processing, nothing much is going to happen. So these are the outcomes for you, what you're going to be able to do after this webinar. You're going to be able to, of course, explain what self-regulated learning is, not only the informal definition, but also the more formal one, and how it enhances student learning. You're going to be able to integrate self-regulated learning activities into your tutoring in many different ways. And I know that some of you are probably also teaching courses. They might be study skills courses, something like that. And you can definitely use these activities in your courses as well. And you're going to get students to practice self-regulated learning because you're in a position to do these activities with them, to get them to do it, to get them to do these activities in the proper context. Okay, fair warning, we're going to have some activities. So in 20 to 30 minutes or so, you're going to be asked to do a free recall activity that is a self-regulated learning activity. So I want you to listen carefully for major points. And this is something that you could do with your students, particularly if you're in a course, but you can also teach students to do this when they are taking other courses. Okay, so this is unfortunately the way most students think. Learning is something that happens or doesn't happen to them. It's sort of like the weather. Well, maybe it rains and maybe it doesn't rain, but you know what? They don't have any control over it. That's what they think learning is all about. How should they know what learning is? Nobody's ever explained it to them. They don't learn any cognitive psychology when they're growing up. Furthermore, most students think that learning in college should be easy because for, again, most of the students, it was fairly easy in high school, certainly in elementary school. So, you know, people base their future expectations on their past experience, right? So it's perfectly reasonable for them to think that learning in college should be as easy as it has been in the past. Well, they're wrong. They're wrong. It's really quite different. Now, if learning isn't happening, well, it might be your fault as the instructor or even as the tutor. So, gee, it's all about you, isn't it? It's not really about them. Or it's about the fates, okay? It's hopeless, they weren't born with the talent. So you might hear students say like, well, I wasn't really born to do math, or I wasn't really born to do art. But generally as undergraduates, unless you're majoring in a subject, that we are not asking them, professors are not asking them to do anything that some people cannot do. We're asking them to do things at a fairly low level, even math. And so they can do what we're asking them to do, but they're not used to persevering. They're not used to having to put in effort because they didn't before. Learning was easy, right? And so they're thinking like, well, if this isn't easy, okay, if this isn't easy, there is a problem. And in any case, it's something that I just need to give up on. And this is so unfortunate because learning is all about effort. Learning is all about perseverance. And it doesn't really matter who you are or how smart you are. You were not born with a slew of knowledge. So what is the antidote to this kind of wrong thinking? It's self-regulated learning. It's the conscious planning, monitoring, and evaluation of one's learning in order to maximize it. This is the formal definition of it. Now, the definition implies that it's multi-stage: planning before a learning experience, monitoring during the learning experience, and evaluation of one's learning after the learning experience. So it's something that's going on almost all the time during a learning experience, but sort of it's running in the background, although there are some clear activities that students are supposed to be doing while they're learning, checking in with themselves, right? But this is also not only a multi-stage, but also a multi-dimensional process. And these are the dimensions. Metacognition, you probably have heard about, and you're going to be hearing a lot more from Sandra McGuire on metacognition. So I'm not going to say too much about it, except to say it's thinking about your thinking, monitoring your thinking, planning your thinking and evaluating it. So that's what metacognition is. It's all about thinking. Now, self-regulated learning also involves two other dimensions: emotional and motivational control. And students might say, well, I don't have any control over my emotions. Oh, yes, you do. And it's called reframing a situation. It's called reframing. And this is something that cognitive psychologists do all the time with their clients. And in addition to emotional and motivational control, there is control over one's physical environment for learning. Some environments are better than others for different people. So these are the learner's questions. And also these are the bases of class activities that you have with your students when you're tutoring them, and also the basis of a lot of assignments that go on in courses as well. The learner's questions. And so all you have to do is cross the stages with the dimensions, and you get this, oh, it's kind of a matrix. And I just want it, well, first of all, you have the questions in your handout that shows questions that self-regulated learners ask themselves. But I do want to highlight some of these questions. And I'm going to go through, first of all, the planning or forethought process. Some people in self-regulated learning have called it forethought. But in any case, the before. And I'm going to use as a learning experience a reading, doing the reading. But it could be, writing a paper. It could be watching a video. It could be doing any of a number, solving a problem, any of a number of different learning activities. So before, let's look at metacognitively. And this is something that students don't think about doing. setting a goal. What is your goal? And how will you know when you have reached it? Now, what's a learning goal? Well, with reading, you've got to figure out, okay, how do I know that I have learned from this reading what I need to learn? How do I know that? What behavior can I manifest in order to show that I've done this learning? Now, what it might be, for instance, you look through the chapter, there are 5 different sections, and maybe what you're going to be very happy if you can summarize each section in a sentence or 2 without looking at the book. Or it might be, okay, let's see, there are questions at the end of the chapter. Of course, you read those questions first, then you read the chapter. But anyway, I want to be able to answer those questions at the end of the chapter without looking at the contents of the chapter. Okay, so those are perfectly reasonable goals. All right. And what strategies should I use? Now, these are not questions that all of these questions anyway, you don't have students don't necessarily have to ask themselves these questions if they are doing a task they've done before and have learned how to master. But if they are doing a different kind of reading than what they've done before, maybe they're doing reading in a math textbook and they're not used to reading a math textbook, then they need to answer all these questions, as in what kind of a task is it, right? But what strategies should I use? And I name a number of strategies in the handout. Well, guess what? Your students might not know any of these strategies. They really might not. They may not understand that, yeah, self-quizzing is extremely valuable. They've never done it before. They've never heard it before. Fine. Tell them about these options and ask them to try different ones and see how they work. There's the evaluation part of it. Okay. On the meta-emotional, the beginning questions, okay, how interested am I in this topic? How motivated am I to read this chapter, to do what I need to do to learn it? And what students have to do is to reflect back on what the instructor has hopefully said about the utility of this material. If the instructor's taken any faculty development at all, he or she probably knows that you're supposed to explain the relevance of material to students. Students need to remember that, and they need to bring it into their minds when they're starting a learning experience that has to do with that material. And then there's the issue of confidence. You know, and this is confidence is it's sort of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You can be overconfident, and that's not good because then you really won't focus on the material, or you can be underconfident and just feel like giving up when it doesn't come to you easily or when you hit something new. Most unfortunate. And so it's simply a matter of, okay, what tasks have I done that are similar in the past that I've done properly, I've done correctly. So anyway, that's something that students have to find out for themselves. Environmentally, students have to find out the best setting all the way around for their studying. What's the best environment? What's the best physical place? What's the best physical position for them to be in? Lying down is good for nobody, right? But some people can work fine in comfortable chairs. Some people need straight back chairs. What about the temperature in the room? How about the background sounds? There's a minority of people who study best when they are listening to familiar background sounds, like familiar music that they don't have to like think about. Not necessarily loud, but you know. What about, have they had the right amount of sleep? Have they had the right amount of coffee or tea? And have they put their cell phone on the other side of the planet? Okay, they really have to get that away so they don't be hearing the ding, ding, ding of the texts and the whatever sound they've chosen for their email messages as well. So students have to experiment with different environments. They have to get to know themselves better. Okay, so what about during? During the learning experience, they have to be monitoring themselves. And what metacognitively, that means asking themselves, okay, am I making progress towards my goal? I just finished 2 sections. Can I say something about those 2 sections? And if I can't, I need to go back. Okay, I'm not even vaguely meeting my goal. Okay, am I properly focused? Am I getting tired? How well are my strategies working? They working well? What material seems to be most important? What material am I having trouble understanding? And how is my thinking on the topic changing? Which brings us to the emotional side of things, because sometimes students will be learning things that they resist, and they need to be aware of their resistance. Why would they resist it? Because it goes against their previous misconceptions, or their previous conceptions of how something works. And they need to get past that by being aware of their resistance, and then deciding to suspend their judgment about it and try it on for size. Just try it on for size. Okay, environmentally, they need to monitor how well their environment is working for them, including, again, seeing if another if this environment is not working well, trying another environment. It's asking themselves if they need a break. And a lot of people, a lot of students need a break after studying for maybe a half an hour, but that only demands a short break of, let's say, I don't know, a minute or so, maybe a stretch break, maybe a walk around the room break, maybe it's a drink some water break, whatever. Now, after 2 hours or so, then a longer break might be in order, maybe walking around the building, maybe going to get something to eat, doing something that's very different from the cognitive work that they've been doing. So anyway, that kind of break might be 10 minutes long, but then they have to get back to studying, right? Okay, and then let's look at the after part, the evaluation, the reflection part of it. Okay, and the main question metacognitively is, how well did I achieve my goal? Was I able to answer the end of chapter questions? Was I able to recite a couple of sentences on each section of the chapter? If not, what do I need to go back and review? What were the most important points that I learned? And what am I still having trouble understanding? And so maybe I should ask my instructor about this. How does what I have learned relate to other things that I've already learned or have experienced? And this is an excellent question, because this helps get new material into one's long-term memory. In other words, the way you do that is you hook on new knowledge to what's already in your mind, whether it be an experience or something that you have learned. What strategies and approaches worked well? And what do I need to do differently next time? Now, if an approach or strategy didn't work well, this feeds into the emotional part. How am I reacting? Now, if I met my goal, no problem, great. So I feel really good about myself, and I feel more motivated to do this kind of an assignment next time. But what if I did not meet my goal and I had to go back and review and then do this again? And then the problem with being disappointed is, again, this is a place where some students will want to give up. But students need to be convinced to simply try another strategy. Just try another strategy. Same thing with the physical environment. Do I need to experiment with other environments? With different amounts of sleep, with different amounts of coffee or tea, with different temperatures in the room, and different break schedule. So these are the sort of questions that learners ask themselves, self-regulated learners ask themselves. They are taking responsibility for their own learning. And that is so key to success in college, certainly. So, okay, let's look at the benefits to students of self-regulated learning. First of all, it increases learning, which means that it enhances student performance, student success, and it does. And I'm going to give you some evidence for this in just a moment. So anyway, the quality of thinking is better as well. Deeper thinking, more of it. Better focus on learning. Sense of self-efficacy, a sense of being able to, well, having the power to being able to do what one wants to do. And that's the wonderful part of self-responsibility. Usually, because nothing motivates like success, that self-regulated learning increases motivation and ultimately professionalism and adult success as well, in part because students learn how to learn on their own, and also in part because they are less likely to procrastinate and more likely to defer their gratification, which is a part of self-regulated learning. So let's get some evidence on the table, because maybe I just made up everything I said, right? But I didn't. There's a gentleman named John Hattie, who is, I think, from New Zealand. And every so often, he publishes meta-analyses. He and his team go out and collect all the meta-analyses that they can. So these are summaries of the research. But he is doing a summary of the summaries of the research. And on learning, the factors in teacher behaviors and also pedagogies that enhance learning. Now, when he does meta-analyses, he might be looking at hundreds, I mean, literally hundreds of meta-analyses. So this is why he works with a team. So anyway, he looks at the effects of these different factors, different pedagogies and different teacher behaviors from preschool on up through adult education. So this is everything, all right? So these are just a few of his findings. Again, this latest study of his 2017, the URL is in your references. So anyway, teacher credibility. Well, yeah, if you don't believe your teacher, why, what are you going to learn from this person, right? Not much. Now, the effect size of teacher credibility was 0.90. And let me explain to you what that means. It means that a 1 standard deviation plus or minus, positive or negative, in teacher credibility leads to or is associated with 9/10 of a standard deviation, plus or minus, in learning. So this is a big effect. And effect size is often used in meta-analyses and meta-analyses. So you might come across this again, but this is a very good effect size. About scaffolding, well, we know that scaffolding, it readies students to learn. It leads them up to learning. And that effect is 0.8, that effect size is 0.82. Teacher clarity, if you can't understand what your teacher is saying, you're not going to learn much, right? So the effect size of that is 0.75, 3/4 of a standard deviation in learning. Evaluation and reflection and metacognitive strategies are both a part of self-regulated learning. And the first one, evaluation and reflection, has an effect size of 0.75. That's as high as teacher clarity. And metacognitive strategies, 0.60. very substantial effects, and stronger effects than spaced practice versus mass practice. That's, that's spacing out one's review, one's practice. Stronger than mastery learning, service learning, peer tutoring, note-taking, time on task, formative feedback, and so many other things. So that Hattie's studies give a lot of credibility to the claims I was making about self-regulated learning, enhancing learning. So I'm going to tell you about another study that was done by a gentleman named Barry Zimmerman at New York City College of Technology on students who were in developmental math courses. So these are struggling students. These are struggling students, at least in math. He set up a randomized experimental design involving 140 of these students who were in 6 different sections, 3 of which got the regular training, the regular education that they've been giving in the past, and that's the control group, and 3 of which were in sections that were infused with some self-regulated learning activities. All 6 sections gave the same 15 to 20-minute quizzes every with 4 or 5 problems every 2 to 3 class periods, the same 3 major exams, and the same final. So all of these were standardized. However, these were the differences. The instructors in the self-regulated learning sections or treatment sections first explained to their students that errors were learning opportunities, which were really new ideas for students. Errors are not what students consider to be learning opportunities. They consider errors to be failures. They are not. They're learning opportunities. So hopefully, they reinforced this idea, and they modeled error detection and changing strategies to solve a problem more effectively. In addition, on the quizzes, but only on the quizzes, that students had the opportunity to earn back some of the points that they lost by completing a self-reflection form for each missed or incomplete problem. So what was on this self-reflection form? They were supposed to do an error analysis. Okay, what were they thinking when they froze on this question? What were they thinking when they pulled out the wrong algorithm for this problem? Where was their mind? What were they thinking? And they also had to redo a similar problem. This was all voluntary, by the way. Another thing that they had to do was during the quizzes, they had to rate their confidence level before they solved the problem, and then either after they solved it or when they were in the middle of it and reached an impasse. And this sensitized students to their being overconfident if they tended to be overconfident. Well, anyway, so what was the result? Well, there was a significantly higher percentage of students in the treatment group who passed the course, 68% versus 49%, and also also a higher percentage of students in the treatment group passed the gateway test that was required for admission into credit-bearing courses in math, and that was 64% to 39%. That was like radically larger, or I should say that those who passed the course passed into the credit courses out of the control classes, out of the control sections, were like way lower than those in the self-regulated learning sections. So Zimmerman this was during the regular semester. Zimmerman also replicated this study in a 5-week developmental math course offered in the summer. And again, those in the self-regulated learning sections passed the course at a much higher rate than those in the control group, 84% versus 63%. And 60% of the treatment groups successfully completed a credit-bearing math course the following fall, versus only 34% in the control group. Now, the faculty in the developmental writing courses, they heard about this study going on and they said, please come and set this up for us. Please conduct this study for us. So again, half of the sections were controls groups, half of the sections were treatment groups, and the focus was on identifying and correcting errors again. But these were different sort of errors. The quizzes in these writing groups involve students doing a short writing task, such as, paraphrasing a passage or summarizing a passage. And the paraphrasing had to do a paraphrase for this audience, paraphrase for that audience, what have you. Okay, so same kind of thing. If the student didn't do the task properly or didn't finish it, the students could earn back some of the points by redoing the writing task and also answering questions about where they went wrong on the quiz, how they prepared for it, and how they will prepare better for it next time. Here too, we see a radically significant difference in the performance of the students. 72% of the treatment group passed the gateway exam versus only 52% of the control group. And 65% of the treatment group successfully completed a credit-bearing writing course the following semester versus only 32% of the control group. So we are talking about life-changing, truly life-changing effects on these struggling students. And self-regulated learning has its strongest effects on struggling students. Couple of remarks about co-remediation. Co-remediation has been found to be more successful when self-regulated learning is integrated into it. And accelerated courses, there's no evidence at all of less learning, short or long term, or lower satisfaction. So that is maybe some good news, just to let you know what the research says about these sorts of courses. Okay, so here is your first self-regulated learning activity. This is an awareness-raising reflection. How does the material you've heard so far connect or conflict with your prior knowledge, beliefs, or values? Now, note here, I want you to put this in the chat box, it's really the Q&A box. I want you to see that I'm asking you to connect new knowledge to what's already in your head, already in your mind. And so this will help your long-term memory of this new material. But this is an activity that you can do with your own students. Do with your own students. So,
yeah, so as we mentioned, the chat box is not working the way we hoped it would today, but you could still use that questions box to put your response to Dr. Nelson's question in there, and we will read them out as they come in. So we've gotten one response so far, so I'll read that.
Please, because I can't.
It's okay, yeah.
Okay.
Not a problem. So Inez says, oh, we've got a few come in. All of this makes total sense with my practice. I use strategies based on the relational learning framework.
Okay, good.
And Melody says, I was familiar with metacognition. I love the addition of the 2 other dimensions.
Good.
Linda says, this connects well with my beliefs and values. I like the way the information is outlined so clearly in the handout. It brings the information together meaningfully.
I'm so glad.
Romy says, the material falls in line with my own personal ideas regarding learning. The student must participate in their own success.
Yes.
Jasper says, the process of connecting prior knowledge during evaluation reminds me a lot of living learning communities relying on interconnected topics and conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Ellen says, mostly confirms beliefs, was surprised to hear that SRL is stronger than distributed practice. Having time to work with students in SRL is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Suzanne says, this material connects well with my prior knowledge and I am learning ways to improve my own exam redo process for my pre-service teachers in her own classes.
Excellent.
Ron says, this connects with the LD Finks taxonomy.
Yeah.
Jessica says, I think this connects very strongly with some of the courses I have done in regards to adult learning specifically. It is nice to see how this can also be very easily applied and issued with undergraduate students rather than just being mainly a focal point with mature students or non-traditional adult learners. We've got a lot of responses. Lori says, this validates what I already know about struggling students. They hate having to teach themselves, but we must show them how.
Yeah.
Jeannie
It's
says,
not
I
as
did,
bad as they.
Jeannie did not receive the handout. Okay, we'll, I'll make sure that you get that.
Okay.
Madeline says, this aligns so much with the ways I want to equip and empower students, connects a lot with my own research and experience with agency and self-advocacy. John Q says, to me, it makes a lot of sense because I studied SRF and try to practice it in my class, but it can be hard for students to use it at the beginning and as it takes time to see the outcomes. Bear says, I have been a proponent of speaking to the students about their own motivations and taking an active role in their own education, but it still doesn't really address deeper motivational issues or students who don't do well with highly structured approaches such as ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Tammy says, I was aware of the need to be responsible for one's own earning. I was not aware of just how much it affects success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
It really
Quentin
does.
says, my students and I were just discussing autonomy in education and life as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
It's Sydney. Hi, Sydney. The
Perfect.
material has reinforced what I have been telling my students, that they need to evaluate their learning process to improve what they get out of each course. The handout is great for giving our students more information for how they can evaluate and improve their practice. I was both surprised and not surprised that SRL has such a large effect on learning.
Mm-hmm. It's huge. It's huge, especially for some students.
Yvette says, I'm finding new terms for things that I have learned as a learner. The ideas of self-reflection, self-quizzing, and reflection on how feeling before, during, and after. Using this in co-remediation is key, but difficult due to time constraints.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big thing that comes up whenever we're making any changes. That's why it's so easy to kind of stay in these little boxes and feel like, you know, these practices are the way we want to keep doing them. Annette says, the 3 dimensions, especially environmental, can give students the start of the idea that they have some control over learning. It does not happen to them, they do it.
Mm-hmm.
Marie says, this connects students to the subject and engages them to participate more in the process of learning. Edward says, the on-be conflict that I have is, I think you meant only, okay. The only conflict, excuse me, that I have is that some students are indifferent. Overall, this does connect with my own views of this subject.
Okay.
Yeah, I have experience teaching students who are kind of indifferent to the material. So it's, you know, it can definitely be a challenge to get them to understand how the material will relate to their success. A couple more. Tammy says, I now have to figure out how to incorporate this in a class where I cannot give exams or homework. Ooh, that's a unique challenge.
Well, you can't. Oh no, that's too bad.
Bear says, this also doesn't really address the teacher's willingness to put in the extra work to encourage the students to work on metacognition.
Should we go on, or are there?
Just one more. Melanie says, I can see relevance for trauma affected learners, guiding them to take time to reflect and develop their learning experience. Okay.
Yeah. Very, very good. I'm just as thrilled as can be. So I'm glad that this doesn't strike you as crazy, because I can assure you it's not. Okay. All right. So thank you for doing that activity, and you'll get the slides right after this, and you'll be able to use this with your students as well.
Yes.
Okay.
And oh, and I do want to mention, because we did have one or two people say they didn't get the handout. If you like registered like right before we started, I might not have gotten that to you, or the email might have just not made its way to you. There is a section on the right-hand side near the questions option that says handouts, and you'll find the Word version of the handout there if you would like to access it that way.
Okay, great. Okay, so how do you get students to practice self-regulated learning? Okay, you lead with them, and I imagine you also work with groups sometimes, students in groups. You lead self-regulated learning activities, and you ask self-regulated learning questions of the students. Now, students generally don't mind. These are pretty low stress to no stress activities. You can't give the wrong answer unless you just outright lie. And why would you do that? It takes a lot more brain power to lie than just simply to tell the truth. And you don't mind either. You're not, especially in your position, neither you nor instructors are grading activities in class or when you're working with the students face to face or online. And as far as the assignments go, if you were running a class where you can do assignments, or if you're talking to an instructor who runs a course where there are assignments, generally anything that students might do to hand in, they're just checked off. In other words, if they do it completely, the way they're supposed to answer 3 questions, they answer 3 questions, that in that case, they get a point. It passes, okay? It's strictly pass-fail. And the results are pretty evident pretty quickly. When students become aware of their learning, that suddenly it increases. It really does. But this way they are not, otherwise students are sleepwalking through their studying. So, okay. These are the kinds of self-regulating learning activities, sort of a catalog that we're going to touch on for the rest of the webinar. Start of the term, end of the term. Reading wrappers, lecture or lesson wrappers, assignment wrappers, and exam wrappers. Now, start of the term, okay? This is something you can do with your students. You can have them read something on learning and thinking. And because students don't know about learning and they don't know about thinking, and why should they? Now, in the handout on page 3, I recommend a few readings. The first one might be too long for you to assign, but the next 3 that are on the web are a lot shorter. And they're listed there. And then I just give some possible discussion questions, or you might be interviewing the students about it. Anyway, questions to ask students that might get them to get the most out of the reading. Okay, another one is a goal setting exercise. And so let's say that you're tutoring them in a certain course, and they write the first day or week, whatever, how I earned an A in this course. Well, this is how they set a goal. And here's what it is. You'd be surprised, even struggling students pretty much know how to earn an A in a course. It's just that they don't follow through with it. But when they write down what's involved, they are more likely to do at least some of those things, such as going to class every day, studying for the exam, starting a few days before the night before the exam, keeping up with the readings, keeping up with the videos, these sorts of things. And they know they're supposed to do that. Another thing you can have them do is to take a self-assessment instrument on metacognitive skills. I recommend a couple of them on the web in the handout. on page 4. You can read about these. One of them, the first one is pretty much for sciences and math, but the second one is for anything. And what you might want to do is simply pick out the questions from these instruments, because the first one has 27 items, the second one has 52 items. That might be too many, but you might want to zero in on some of those skills that are going to help them most in the subject matter that you are tutoring them in. Both, well, the first one, first inventory, metacognitive activities inventory, that the way students answer the question is always or almost always or never or almost never. You know, once the result is obtained, I check to see if it agrees with what I expected. Well, you should do that, but do you do it always or almost always or sometimes or whatever? The second one is a strongly agree, strongly disagree set up. So like the belief, the first one, I have control over how well I learn. Students may start out disagreeing, but hopefully if you work with them on self-regulated learning, that they will, by the end of the semester or term, that they will be more likely to agree with it. But anyway, you can look at those if you're interested in doing this with your students. Another thing you can do with your students is you can have them do a little reflective writing on the nature of the subject matter. As in, you know, what do they think chemistry is? Why is chemistry a science? And this is good because it gets students thinking chemistry, oh yeah, I know something about what chemistry is. Now, they might have misconceptions about what chemistry is, but the fact of the matter is they get those misconceptions on the table. And if they do know something correct about chemistry, they bring up that prior knowledge. But this can really work with any subject matter at all. So these are the sorts of, they're just little things. They don't take very long at all. They simply take very little time. Okay, so I want to know, and you know, instead of putting it into the Q&A, I just want you to write down what you will do to enhance your students' self-regulated learning skills at the start of the term. So just write that down because I want you to take something with you. Which of the 4 things listed here appeal to you? Which of these appeal to you? Which one or ones might you do? And so I'm going to give you just a few seconds to reflect and write that down. Okay, when you're done with that, we're going to go right into another activity. And again, put this into the Q&A. I want you, this is a 2-part thing. I want you to take the role of a student, pretend you're a student who has been listening to the lesson, okay? And then what I want you to do is to write down all the important points that you can recall. And I don't care what you recall. That's not the point. That's not the point. So I want you to answer privately on paper all the things that you can recall, and I will tell you when a minute is up. But what I want you to do is to take note of what your mind is doing to do this recall activity. It's a free, what's called free recall activity. And put that in the Q&A. Write down all the important points that you can recall for a minute privately and take note of what your mind is doing and put that into the chat box. Okay, you can begin. Okay, that was a minute. That was a minute. So what was your mind doing to accomplish this task?
We're getting responses here. Trying to remember the slides,
Mhm.
visualizing the content of the slides.
Visual, yeah. Greetings from UCR, University of California, Riverside. Yes, I worked there for a while.
Monica says, I was picturing the slides in my head. Barack says, remember the talking points that stuck with you the most, recall the visual parts, making connections with the concepts or questions, looking at the notes I've been taking, thinking about the activities that might fit with this, searching for the part that shared evidence that SRL has been backed by legit research, visualizing the environment. Trying to remember the slides again.
Yes.
Recall the tables and keywords.
Uh-huh.
Sydney says, my mind wanted to start from the beginning and list everything I knew. I was trying to mentally articulate the overall message in a way that was meaningful for me. That's Brady says.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I'm not surprised that so many of you used your internal visual part of your mind to do this. I'm going to talk about visuals in just a little bit, but just letting you know that yeah, we tend to be highly visual, and it has nothing to do with learning styles at all. we all rely on visuals. This is one of the things, well, one of the sense that we depended on most in our very early years as Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and whatever. We depended mostly on more on our eyes than any other sense, as far as we know. So it's not surprising that we rely so much on our visual sense. Okay, so what we just did was a lecture or lesson wrapper called Periodic Free Recall. It is self-testing. So, and it works like this. Students listen to a lesson, and then they close their notebooks and they write down all the important points they can recall and their questions. Now, if this is done in a class, there is a third step where students work with who's ever sitting next to them, or work somebody else in the class if you're doing it remotely, to fill in their blanks, to elaborate on what they wrote, to correct what they wrote, and to add to what they wrote. And they could also answer each other's questions, and they often do. So anyway, that's periodic free recall. Self-testing. Self-testing, it's going to come up again and again because self-testing is the way you learn. It's a major part of the way you learn. It's one of the best strategies around because you get practice recalling, retrieving. It's excellent. Okay, here's another lesson or lecture wrapper, and you can have students do this on the day's class. They can do it in front of you, but this is a great way to get students to review a class, the same way that the free recall was. Most useful or valuable thing you learned. So if they're, if you're seeing them for a math class, you ask them, okay, write down the most useful or valuable thing you learned in that class today. What's the most important point or central concept? What surprised you the most? What idea did? What could you put into practice now? What stands out in your mind? And our old favorite, how does the content connect or conflict with your prior knowledge, beliefs, or values? So these are different minute papers that you can ask your students to write in a tutoring session. So this is wonderful. Let's shift now to reading wrappers, which apply just as well to videos or podcasts, whatever they have been assigned by the instructor. All right. So, and by the way, these things are called wrappers because they wrap around the regular assignment. They complement the regular assignment and truly increase the learning of the learning value of the regular assignment. So, reflective study questions. This might start sounding familiar. These are like the 1-minute papers, but they would go along with it with like a reading assignment. Okay, but this is at the end of the reading assignment. What are the most important concepts or principles, and what don't you understand clearly? So you reflect on that. Make comparisons or connections to prior learning or what you're learning in other courses. Write down your affective reactions. It's a great idea to get students to connect their cognitive learning to their emotions. What happens is the emotional part brings in new neurotransmitters into the learning experience. So here we're talking about attitudes, values, beliefs, and just in general emotions. And not all material will probably evoke an affective reaction, but some will, and certainly more in the humanities and social sciences than perhaps in the sciences and math. And of course, any of those 1-minute paper questions are perfectly appropriate as a reading wrapper as well. And here we go to self-testing again. Students do not know how to read a textbook. Let alone to study out of the textbook. Okay, so this is please teach them this method. This is another thing that can be life-changing, and it's very efficient, very efficient. It's called read, recall, review, and this came out of learning psychology or cognitive psychology. So here's what you do. You read the textbook and then you put it away. And if you're doing any notes, you put those away too. And then you recall all you can. Sound familiar? And you recite it aloud or you write it down. Now, an instructor who wants to do this as homework, of course, would have the student write it down. But the instructor doesn't really care at this point what the student initially recalls. It's not so important because the third step, read, recall, review. So you write down all you can and then you go back through the chapter looking for what you misunderstood or forgot. And then you recall those again. It's just like flashcards, isn't it? Just like flashcards, only it's a big flashcard, right? Because it's the chapter. But it's the same thing. What did you recall the first time? And you wrote it down and recited it. So you also, reinforced what you recalled, either listening to it or writing it down. And then you go back and you review what you didn't get the first time, you recall those again. Same thing with flashcards. So when you know something, you do well with that flashcard, you put it aside, right? It's the flashcards that you didn't get that you go over again. So there's been a lot of research on this technique, and you get a lot better both immediate and delayed free recall of fact-based passages, which is largely what students are assigned to read, than rereading, because that is the default method of students for both reading a chapter, oh yeah, I'm going to learn this chapter, or reviewing for a test, is to reread. Highly ineffective. Students don't enjoy it, and it's hard for them to focus. So rereading is a bad idea. Please let your students know. This read, recall, review, it's just as powerful as note-taking, but it takes less time. And it gives a learner deliberate practice, which is a fancy term for practice with feedback. They see immediately, okay, I didn't recall it. I didn't recall it. That's fine. Or I did recall it. Okay, so I've got that down. And retrieval practice, which is practiced remembering, recalling. The whole thing is what we've learned from psychology is that the more often you recall something, the easier it is to recall it the next time, right? And I just want to tell you just very, very briefly about one of the research studies that was done, because it's really striking, really. So this was, there were subjects brought in that were asked to read something out of history. It was non-technical. And so they read it. They were both groups. There were two groups, and they were both given the same amount of time. One group was told to just reread it as many times as you can. And the other group was told to do read, recall, review as many times as they could within the time allotted. Well, what happened? The reread group was actually within that time rereading this history, I don't know what you call passages or whatever, a total of 16 times. What a drag, right? And the read, recall, review people did that an average of 3 times in the time that they were allotted. And 2 weeks later, subjects called back in, asked to take a test, a multiple choice test on the facts out of that history reading. And so guess what happened? The reread group 16 times recalled only 40%. In other words, they got a 40% on the quiz. The read, recall, review group got a 60% on the quiz. And of course, they couldn't, study in advance or anything like that. But it goes to show you how poor, what a poor investment rereading and rereading is. Please tell your students, I beg of you. Okay, how about visual study tools? And these are also good for lesson wrappers as well. Now, this is the beauty of visual study tools. When students are making their own visuals, they are actively integrating and structuring the knowledge themselves. This is how we remember things long term. This is how faculty members remember their discipline. This is how you remember your professional practices. You have them organized sort of in a vague visual picture in your head. Visuals also lower cognitive load. That is, they require less effort of your mind, less working memory, and fewer cognitive transformations than do text require. Text is not really easy on our minds at all. It takes a lot of cognitive transformation for us to, and not to mention our students, for the students to take the black marks on a white page and turn that into real comprehension, real conceptual understanding. Visuals really help reading comprehension and understanding. In addition, visuals cue the text. This is what you were doing when you were doing that read, recall, when you were doing the periodic free recall. Cues the text. You were remembering the visual, you're remembering the picture of the text. This is what people do, or this is what lots of successful people do when they're in an exam, they can't remember some information, and they picture the page in the textbook where that information is. And maybe you just, okay, it's in the second column, there's a map up there in the first column, and you can almost read that information in the second column, assuming you studied it to begin with. So it will cue the text. It helps you remember the text just from a visual, and it's cross-cultural as well. for students whose whose first language is not English, that it's so much easier for them to work with visuals. So what do I mean by visuals? Okay, this is a flow chart, which is great when the knowledge that they have to remember, that they have to learn, is a sequence of events or operations or a causal or procedural process. Concept circle diagrams are great when their students are looking at relationships among concepts and categories and principles, topics. There is the matrix. There are classified matrices, or compare and contrast matrices. And this is just an example of one. Of course, you have to fill in all the cells for this matrix, for just remembering the matrix, to bring back what's in the cells. There are cycles, that's a common visual. And there's the concept map. When the knowledge is hierarchical, that concept maps are most useful. And that means concept maps are arrange concepts in such a way that the most inclusive or broad or abstract are at the top. And then you work your way down through the more exclusive, narrow, concrete concepts or categories or equations or principles or topics. A mind map, it's often used for free association, but it's a hierarchy anyway you cut it. It's just a spread out hierarchy. So again, don't put this in your Q&A, but I want you to think about what will you do to enhance your students' self-regulated learning skills in readings and lectures or lessons. And I will just zip back through these very carefully. Which ones look particularly attractive to you? And just take a minute, make a decision, write it down. So yes, these were the visual study tools. Read, recall, review, form of self-testing, reflective study questions, minute papers on either the day's class or the readings, or periodic free recall.
So while we're waiting for folks to respond to that, we did have another question come in.
Yes.
Bear wants to know, has there been any research on how these could work for blind students?
Nope, I know of absolutely no research on that. And my guess would be it might make a difference as to whether students lost their sight while, depending on when they lost their sight, but if they lost their sight after they acquired a memory, or if they were born without sight. So I have no idea. I know nothing about, nor do I know anybody in self-regulated learning who knows anything about the differences with either, well, certainly with students with serious sight problems. Sorry, wish I did.
No, thank you for that response.
Sure, yeah, it's the old, I don't know, and I don't think I can find, but this, I don't think I can find out either, right, because I'm pretty familiar with that literature.
Well, we did have a response from somebody in the audience to that question. Tammy says, I have been able to use the Venn diagrams for visually impaired students using puffy paint, and she said that did help.
Okay, that's fabulous. That's wonderful. So that did help. That's terrific. Okay, all right. So let's move on to how you can help students with assignments. These are meta assignments. If you are tutoring students in any kind of math-based field, and you're using groups, just small groups, even pairs, that you could do a think aloud to prepare students to do their homework, where partners will start in on the problems, at least the first two problems. Partners help each other talk through the problem and guide their, formulating their solutions. And so on the first problem, one person is doing the problem, the other one is helping that person through the problem. And then for question 2, they trade off. So they do the other way. Another thing you can do, and this harks back to Zimmerman's study, have students learn from a problem that they didn't get right. Use those errors as learning opportunities so they can write an error analysis and solve the same problem or a similar problem. But they're going to learn how to solve that problem. They're going to learn it. And they're going to reflect back and figure, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? With papers and projects, it depends on, what's relevant to the paper or project. You can have students do this while they are doing the paper or project. What process did they follow? What reasoning did they use to solve the problem? So they are aware of their reasoning, they're aware of the process. That you can have them do a self-evaluation of their paper or project before they hand it in, right? So they can go back and they can, make improvements. You can have students, if they're not working with their instructor's written feedback, have them paraphrase that feedback. Students, unfortunately, they get a grade on something and then they, dump it into their circular file. No, have them, okay, bring in this paper when you get it back and let's go over what the instructor said. You can have students, if the students are going to revise the project, have them write down their goals and strategies for their revision before they do the revision. This way they actually have a plan. Have students also at the end of an assignment write down the value of that assignment to reflect on what skills they gained or improved in the course of the assignment. So they really understand the learning value of it and they understand their own learning from it. What about, let's get into some post-exam wrappers. And I know that these are already used at least in some learning centers or student success centers, and they're also faculty who use them. This can be life-changing, really life-changing. Get students to reflect on the exam, the graded exam, and to think about, okay, look at what you expected. What was your expected performance? What was your actual performance? How do you feel about your grade compared to what you expected? A lot of students think they did better than what they actually did, and that's a good lesson for them. But they need to really think about it. How many hours did you study? Just long enough time? How did you study? Did you do reread the way I told you not to? Or did you do some self-testing? Some read, recall, review along the way? Or what did you do? What did you do? Why did you lose points? Do you see any patterns to your losing points? And for the next exam, set a goal and design a study game plan. What will you do differently next time than what you did this time? You can also have students resolve problems that they didn't do correctly the first time, or have them do a similar problem and then write out the correct strategy. What is the correct strategy? But again, this is using errors as learning opportunities. Or you can have students fill out a test autopsy form, and it's an error analysis form, really. And it's okay if you want to add reflection probes to it as well, like what you saw on the last slide. It looks something like this. Okay, which question or questions did you miss? What did it cost you? What type of question is it? And why was your answer incorrect? Was it your own carelessness? Was the material like strange to you because you didn't study it? Did you misinterpret the question? And the last one is, did you run out of time? In which case you weren't budgeting your time correctly. All of these reasons help students take responsibility for missing the question. And of course, that's what we want. You know, students hate to take responsibility, but on the other hand, it's empowering as well. If this was in your hands, if you're getting the right answer, the wrong answer is your, quote, your fault or your responsibility, then you can get more right answers. You simply have to work a little differently for them. So, okay, so again, just take a moment. Which of the self-regulated learning practices in assignments or in exams did you particularly like? So I'm going to just have you review just a bit. Which ones appeal to you? Which ones appeal to you? Which ones appeal to you? Okay. Okay, I will move along and just say a few words about what you can do at the end of the term. Talk about getting students to take responsibility. You can have students write a little self-evaluation. How I earned an A in this particular course or not. Where they have to realize, okay, I knew how to earn an A in this class, but you know, I didn't do everything I was supposed to. Well, students see that. Students take responsibility. You can have students repeat that reflective writing on the nature of the subject matter and correct and compare so they get a sense of all that they learned, or you can repeat that self-assessment of those metacognitive skills and have them compare as well. So hopefully they have added more metacognitive skills to their learning repertoire. So this is the last activity for you, and this is just a review and evaluate reflection. I want you to answer one of these two probes, your choice, whatever, about this webinar. What is or are the most useful or valuable things that you learned? And what is or are the most surprising or unexpected ideas you encounter? And so please, please put your answer or answers in the Q&A.
So we've had some responses come in
Good.
already. Let me get back up to the. We have, I think the post-exam reflection could be used for a graded essay as well. I want to suggest faculty send their students in with essays that got low grades. Valerie has a question. She wants to know if she can use your handout or the PowerPoint in her tutor training.
Oh, please, 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 please. Yeah, I just granted you copyright rights. I mean, yes, no, these things are for you to use with your students. And faculty members ask me that too. Yes, yes, please use it. Yeah, I put it together. So what? They don't. The only way they help me is to give you valuable material in a webinar or workshop.
Awesome. Thank you. Valerie, I see your hands raised. I hope that answers your question. If not, feel free to type another question in. Let's see, we got a few other responses. Yvette says, I like the links to self-evaluation, the readings to introduce the students to SRL. Reflections on graded exams appeal the most to me. The variety of tools available. I didn't expect to hear don't reread. I often ask students to reread material and I will no longer do that.
No, I mean, hey, if they want to reread, you can't stop them. But it's just not an effective way to study for a test. Or to actually like learn the material, which is, see, that's their default. That's all they know. And there are better ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. And Tammy says, I will use the test reflection 2 classes from now. So already a plan in place. I will definitely use the read, recall, review.
Yeah.
Those
See,
some
in
of
the
the
read,
responses
recall,
we got.
review, you are kind of rereading a little bit, but you're rereading with a goal. You're rereading with a goal to find out what did I get wrong, or what did I forget?
I like this response from Cynthia. She says, I am very familiar with SRL strategies as an instructor, but I was today years old when it occurred to me that this could be used in tutor training, thus passing the skills on through a peer.
Wonderful, wonderful.
We're
Yes,
getting
you're
we're getting
very
a number of we're getting a number of comments about how helpful this was for many of our attendees. So
oh, good.
Really good.
I am so happy. It's been such a pleasure sharing this material with you. You're in a very, very powerful position because students look to you as the expert in helping them learn. Not so much the faculty member. You're more powerful than you know because your expertise is their learning. So please, please run with it.
And I do want to mention, I know that we're at the end of our time, so we're about to wrap up, but for those of you who have to go, thank you for coming. We are going to be sending out the recording of this session to everyone who registered. Just give us a few days to put it together. And like I said, I will email out both the handout again for anybody who missed it and the PowerPoint slides to all who registered after we conclude.
That's great. Thank you all so much for being so attentive and contributing so much.